Welcome to Live from Plato's Cave. I am Mario Veen. This is episode 33, Environmental Philosophy with Yogi Hendlin. I don't know if you've noticed, but there's been a theme in the last couple of episodes. I know, it's very subtle, but maybe you've noticed that it has been kind of about climate. And I did not really intend this podcast to be about the things that are actually happening now in society, the current affairs. I wanted to speak with people more about the eternal values, like the ones on the surface. But I guess I'm learning as well, right? That those two aren't separate. And I knew this already, but they're not separate in ways that I hadn't seen before. So a lot of things that we've been talking about, well, they're happening now if you look around you, if you watch the news, and some of them are happening in my own life as well. A while back I was also talking about the difference in Plato's Cave between the first and the last scene. In the first scene, prisoner is released and dragged up to the surface. The prisoner struggles, they want to go back to their seat, they're in pain, everything like that, okay, but they get to the surface. And once they see something new there, they realize the way I have seen the world, what I experience is only a part of what there actually is. And when the prisoner returns into the cave, they have a new insight. They can put what is happening there in perspective. So then we get to the last scene where the people who are still in the same position as the prisoner was before, they're still watching the shadows. They're still being distracted by it. They're busy with, well, in our society, you could say with competition, with social status, with making money, with all those kind of things. And it's not that those things are not good or something like that. I'm not saying that. But it means, like we discussed in the episode with Bergson, that their perception is limited because your perception is narrowed by action. And that determines what you see and what you don't see, and even what exists for you and what doesn't exist for you. So what is the difference between the last scene of Plato's allegory of the cave and the first scene? Well, in the last scene, he tries to free those people, but they resist and they even try to kill him. So that's the part I'm interested in right now. What is it that if you come somewhere, you present, scientific findings, perhaps even scientific findings that we have known already for over 40 years. Actually, that companies that like Shell and ExxonMobil knew much longer already and decided not to share with us and instead spread disinformation that is still affecting our society and our portrayal of science today. What is it that if you write about that or speak out about that, there is such resistance, and it seems to be personal. Like people getting angry, people telling you that you don't take them seriously, people wondering like, what are you doing here? So what is it that is so threatening to them? So this is the simplest way I can put it. Why do the people who have been in the cave get so angry? Why do they try to kill the one that tries to free them? It's because they are afraid of change. They want everything to stay the same. And of course, change isn't always good. And there's a value in traditions. And we also need a transmission of the past. We actually need to be in touch with our elders and their wisdom. However, as people like Darwin said, survival of the fittest means survival of those who can adapt and can change their ways if the world demands it. Right now, we live in a world where if we keep on doing things the same, well, our children won't have an easy time. So we desperately need to change. And there are many, many people and more people who are saying that. But the people who want to keep everything the same now start to be in touch with their fear and their anger and their emotions. And I guess in a way it's a good thing because they've been out of touch with their emotions. But if they get angry, And if those people are the ones in charge, you better get out of the way. So I'm very happy that I am able to discuss with just the right person. It almost happens every episode that it's just the right person that I can speak about this with. Our guide to Plato's Cave today is Dr. Yogi Hale Hendlin. He's an environmental philosopher and a public health scientist. Hendlin is assistant professor at the Erasmus School of Philosophy at Erasmus University Rotterdam, as well as a research associate in the Environmental Health Initiative at the University of California, San Francisco. Hendlin's research has been published in journals such as Annals of Internal Medicine, BMJ, American Journal of Public Health, Environmental Ethics, and many other journals. The international press regularly features Hendlin's public health research. Hendlin's interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary research projects tackle major questions in philosophy of biology, environmental philosophy, and political philosophy. That's a nice combination, right? Hendlin's epistemological inquiries into public health follow the via negativa of agnotology, trying to understand the systematic transmission of ignorance. Right, and that's one of the things that I'm interested in. How do we stop the transmission of ignorance? Hendlin earned a PhD in philosophy, magna cum laude, at the University of Kiel, Germany in 2015. He holds degrees from the University of California, Berkeley, UCLA, and the London School of Economics, and held postdoctoral research fellowships at the University of Vienna and the University of California, San Francisco. Hendlin was designated a 2020 Brocher Foundation Fellow. His current research projects focus on the monographs Industrial Epistemics, Chronic Disease and the Corporate Determinants of Health, and Interspecies Politics, Valuing Difference in the Biotic Community.
Okay.
All right. So, this is one of the things I enjoy most in my life, to speak to people that I read some of your work. I know you have a lot to say. I know we can probably go anywhere in this conversation, but I don't really know where we're going to go.
Great.
And I just really like that. I mean, it's really a privilege to speak to people like you. So I just want to start with that.
I love speaking with people like you too. So
nice.
Likewise. Yeah.
So, what's your favorite place in Plato's Cave?
My favorite place?
Yeah, is it the shadow realm where the people stay, or the way upwards, or the way at the surface, or going down again?
Well, I mean, I see part of Plato's, the allegory of the cave, as this exercise in futility, right? And, as a student of Socrates, who was put to death, or chose death, rather than exile, I think that the allegory of the cave shows sort of like this prefiguration of Sisyphus, right? That you can try as much as you want to free people, and that we cannot be freed by anybody if we're not willing to do so, right? So in terms of place, I think my favorite is going up. And first, being blinded and not being able to see or make anything out, and then having vision come in. And then, I think for me, because that is sort of like the Buddha's path, right, of enlightenment, coming into the light, and it's a personal journey, right? And I think first and foremost, our paths of understanding, even though they're always informed by everybody, basically, like, you had to get loose from your chains somehow.
Yeah.
And nobody gets loose from their chains by themselves, sui generis, right? That's the myth of the self-made man, right? So first, let me disabuse that idea that like some heroic person like broke free, and, but, the initial inclination to turn away from the distraction, right? And we could talk about what is distraction. It's different for everybody, right? That's one of the, I would say, paradoxes of reality is that there's no one good thing or bad thing that we can stick our staff in the ground and say, this is the way, this is not the way for everyone. Because how we've been programmed or engineered to be deceived and deceive ourselves. I see those as a student of agnotology, the study of the shadow side of epistemology, how ignorance is perpetuated in systems. Mm-hmm. I don't see this as a purely, you could say, a personal salvation that's possible, or a personal damnation, or as they did it to me, they're responsible, or they're going to save me. Yeah. So it's not a self or other binary. It's always a constitution.
Yeah, we all share this world.
Yeah, we all share this world, but we all interpret it differently. Right? That's the principle of hermeneutics. Whatever reality is, there are so many different levels of interpretation that are going on that, yes, with intersubjectivity, we can come to agree on certain things. But some of us, for example, have color blindness. Yeah. And so what is the actual state of things? How people without color blindness see things, or people with color blindness see things? To put it in another way, how is the actual state of what a flower looks like? How we see it, or how a bee sees it? And the answer is not one or the other. The actual factual reality is both and more, and infinitely more. So this notion of the cave, when we're looking at this projection, right? In Buddhism, we call it Maya. Any sort of illusion. And we get wrapped into it. I was just reading today, showing some students, Cosmopolis by Stephen Tolman. And if I may, as a philosopher,
yeah, go ahead.
Read a short passage. So he says here, in one sense, the idea of modernity coming to an end is paradoxical. For advertisers of consumer goods, to be modern is just to be new, to be the latest thing. Le dernier cri, superseding all similar things. Most of us are living in a consumption economy which never tires of novelty, and its motto, semper aliquid novi, was already familiar to Paul of Tarsus. In this sense, the future brings us new and more, quote-unquote, modern things one after the other, so that modernity is the inexhaustible cornucopia of novelty. Right? And so the idea that the more we chase entertainment, the more we chase novelty, the more we chase deus ex machina, the technological solution to our problems of environment, human society, the human mind, relations, the more we chase the next new thing, as academics, citing the newest authors, the newest papers.
Don't cite anything before 1980.
Exactly. Yeah. We are instructed that the majority of our citations should be within the last 5 years, mm-hmm. especially in, you could say, the biomedical sciences. And so what we confront is we're chasing after something that we will never be able to catch up with. Mm. And so what that causes us to look at is, what is the nature of the chase? René Girard, in his work, talks about mimetic desire, that we ascribe value and meaning to the things that we see the people around us ascribe meaning and value to. And I find this very important because this insinuates that we're not living in a bubble, that we, as Socrates and the Buddha says, we did not develop our morals, our values, our ambitions, our appetites in a vacuum, sui generis, but instead we were thrown into this world that already was telling us what to do. Some might call it the superego. But we are deeply social animals. And that requires us to reflect on whether our current social configuration is giving us something that's life-affirming or life-denying, right? And in the cave, I think it's fair to say that this panini et circensi that we're seeing, right, the bread and circuses, which keeps us barely alive, not thriving, but what Agamben calls bare life, we're literally up against the wall. We will make it through the day. We will be entertained and awestruck, but we will be paralyzed into neglecting 99% of who we are and our possibility. And Socrates always comes back to this question of, well, who are you? Do you know who you are? And the metaphor of peeling away the layers of an onion, right, or taking off a knight's armor is appropriate to understand how we've been encrusted with certain ways of beings and habit patterns and programs that prevent us from actually understanding who we are in the full dimensions of the term. I always make this distinction between what we often take to be human nature in industrialized society, that of Hobbes and Machiavelli, that we're just nasty, selfish animals, and so we have to be disciplined, and we have to have a strong sort of patriarchal state, which tells us what to do, because we're not capable of doing that ourselves, the masses. And the sense of entitlement, blue blood, all of these familiar tropes. And then the work of, you could say, Rutger Bregman, right, with De meeste mensen dogen, humankind, right? Yeah. Or if you look at the work of David Graeber and David Wengrove in The Dawn of Everything, where they make very clear that this idea that we are competitive and zero-sum game seeking by nature is not our nature at all, but what happens basically when you throw a primate into a cage and create a system of artificial scarcity in which then you get this, you could say, untoward competition, right? That's self-devouring and other-devouring and devouring our earth. And I think it's quite interesting when you look outside of these situations of enforced artificial scarcity, that if you ask anybody how you want to live, they say, well, I want neighbors that I love and trust and who, our kids can play together and that we can share things. And I want to be able to work with people who I trust and respect. And I don't have to worry about backstabbing or any of these things.
Spend time with the people that you love.
Yeah.
Work on things that inspire you.
Exactly.
Make some music, maybe. Yeah.
And this is inherently cooperative.
Yeah.
Right. So.
And it's everywhere. It's not scarce.
Absolutely. And Frans de Waal shows very clearly in his work, the primatologist and philosopher Frans de Waal, that bonobos, for instance, are very cooperative, and even chimpanzees in non-scarcity situations are highly cooperative, and in fact actually choose their alpha male leaders through cooperative intersex planning, right? So they promote sometimes betas to alpha because they want somebody that is cooperative, right? And so when I think of Plato's cave, the notion of trying to convince others of the insights that we have, that to me is the most tragic, right? Yeah. The most tragic aspect. And in my personal life, as an academic at a large research institution, I've also experienced that tragedy, right? Where Everybody, for example, thinks that they're an expert at politics.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody thinks that they're a philosopher. Everybody thinks that they know about certain things because it's part of the milieu of our media culture. And yet, there are certain things that only a lifetime of dedication can reveal. And I'm not saying that this is some arcane or esoteric knowledge. I teach it to my students every semester. But the notion that our preferences and our ways of understanding are somehow intrinsically true just by virtue of us believing in them is very hard to shake.
Yeah. Right. So it sounds like you're saying two things about Plato's cave, like what is the makeup of the cave. One is that if everything needs to be new, it means that the moment you buy a phone, it's new, right? I buy it, but next year it's not new anymore. So I need a new one. So if this is in our consciousness, it means that what does it mean for memory? How far back does our memory go? How much can we build on, for instance, let's say the knowledge of my grandfather who passed away a few years ago, but who lives in a very different world than I did, but probably has some things that he could tell me right now that would be very valuable with me, even though he's not caught up. So like how far does the bubble extend back into time at this moment? And the other one, I think, has to do with you make people feel that there's something at stake. So in their social status or in their relationship or something like that, this is what you have to fight for today. So you're distracted because you cannot focus your attention on those long-term goals, these practices why would you sit and meditate every day for an hour for 10 years if you calculate the meaning of this hour and what you could do with that in terms of competition or honing your skills in other things. Mm-hmm. So that would be the third thing, is that you say there's a value in developing something over longer periods of time.
Yeah, the question of memory, institutional memory, of commitment and practice. There's this dictum where society is on a good track when you have old men who plant trees whose shade they will not enjoy.
Right.
And this, up until quite recently, when we sort of entered the era of greed in the last 100 years, this was a principle, a universal principle, I would say worldwide, that you live in connection to your ancestors and to the future. Edmund Burke, the conservative British senator and political philosopher in the UK, he wrote about that we are part of an intergenerational contract. The things we care about only are valuable to us because we believe that we want them to be carried on into the future. Look at philanthropy. People who care about certain things, who really want those things to be studied, learned about, looked at, examined, enjoyed in perpetuity, right? So what the fuck are we doing with climate change? We are throwing away everything we care about because we're basically saying, we don't care about 5 years from now. Look at AI. We don't care what happens next. We're happy to just piss it all down the toilet to make an extra buck now, or because we don't know how to stop this mega machine, this juggernaut, this demon that is possessing us and has us by the throat.
Yeah.
There's not a single logical chain in the whole thing that makes sense.
But isn't that the catch-22? Because it's a crisis of the imagination, right? Of imagining future generations or a future world or even any alternative to capitalism or the way the world works. But one of the ways you get to imagine is when the older generations tell stories to you, and you start to dream and you start to have all these imaginations. But we don't really have that so much anymore. So I guess I read some of your things, and you're very clear about what's going on. You don't mince words about it. And it's important to address this. And in some episodes before I talk to a climate, if you want to be happy, don't talk to a climate scientist. I talked to Chris Julian, to Hannah Prince, who's into law, and to a geologist. And I've had these conversations, and I can only have these conversations because I have a lot of hope. But otherwise, I would also get depressed, but I'm not depressed. I'm actually very happy. But one of the main things I thought about, because I do think there's a value in, you must keep pointing to that, to what's going on.
But it's like, okay, if we're falling off a cliff or in a ship headed towards an iceberg, you can talk about it as long as you want, but the ship keeps on going forward. And so if we take our attention off it, even for a split second, the ship hits it. It's like a friend of mine recently made the analogy, and actually he was saying this is why he quit academia, because you're pushing this system to make change, right? Mm-hmm. Whether it's social, environmental, and it's like rolling a boulder uphill.
Yeah.
And the moment you let up, the boulder just falls right back down to where it was when you began, and you have to start the process anew. And so I think that it's this attention to, this inertia that we have from an industrial system, which believed that instrumentalizing everything for the sake of immediate gain, in the most reductive, constrained way you could possibly imagine it, was somehow worthwhile, good, or worth doing. And when you scale that up globally, and you realize that it's based on slavery and pollution at all levels, fractally, that, this system has a lot of inertia behind it. And so as we know from system science, if you want to change a system that has a lot of inertia, it takes a tremendous amount of energy to shift directions, right? And so that's what we're doing right now. And so that's what we're doing right now globally in a million different ways, trillions of different ways. I always say that, how did we get here? How did we get to this situation right now? It was a death by 100 trillion cuts, right? Little razor blades in our skin. So how are we going to get out of it? Well, it's going to have to be, 100 trillion virtuous actions of healing and mending. And this isn't going to bring us back to any restored place, but it's like a drug addict. This is rehabilitation.
Well, addiction, I think, is the most appropriate paradigm for to understand where we are right now, right?
As an addiction researcher, I must agree with that. Oh,
you are an addiction researcher as well, yeah. What I'm hoping, also for my own sake, is like to answer this question of how do we get beyond cynicism? Because it seems that people switch very quickly from, nothing is going on, it's alarmist. Okay, they start actually learning about the science, or they experience a heat wave or something like that. And then boom, we're all doomed. And what does it matter anyway? And I can tell, I've been studying it. I can tell you, and you know them too, like the bingo. What about China? Let's play some bingo for a while. Okay, what do we have? What about China?
If we don't do it, they will.
Yeah.
Who's going to stop first? Like, we don't want to give up our economic advantage.
What are we? We are only a small country. I'm only a small person. It's too late anyway. The climate has always been changing. And it just goes on and on and on. And but I guess it's good that it comes up, right? Because at least people are talking about.
Yeah, we have to. I mean, this is if you look at the 12-step program Alcoholics Anonymous.
All right.
The first step is admitting you have a problem. And then you have to voice your demons. Like if you have doubts and you try to suppress them, they're just going to steal your energy and stop you from acting, right? So I see doomerism and denial as two sides of the same misbegotten coin, right? They're both equally useless in different ways, right? But they're the opposite of what's actually needed, and that is grieving for the earth, as one of my mentors, Joanna Macy, teaches in her work that reconnects. We to get in touch with our emotions and what she calls our climate grief, our grief for the earth, allows us to realize how much we love life, right? That's what it's all about. Grief occurs because there's love.
Yeah.
And connecting back with that love is what makes us more alive as individuals, as groups, as nations, as a planetary collective.
So you're saying that through grief, you also experience the love that we have for life. That is there.
We reconnect with the fact that it's an amazing blessing to be alive, and how beautifully intricate and complex and loving our biosphere is, how ecosystems are a sign of they are more than a sum of their parts. They are acts of generosity. One organism's waste becomes another organism's food. There is nothing wasted. There is nothing instrumentalized. There's no rush. There is no leaving people behind. There is no, sacrificing this group for the sake of another group. None of that exists, except very recently, historically, in a subset of humans who have then globalized a very dysfunctional colonial practice.
Yeah.
That can be otherwise, has been otherwise, and will be otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, the Earth is amazing, right? Just to think that it was like basically an ice planet for millions and millions of years, and it just restored balance again. So, of course, the Earth will restore balance again as well, right?
Yain. I mean, I do not find solace in, this argument that for many years, I heard of the Earth will be fine. Like, we need to worry about ourselves. Because if you look at secession ecology, so how when, you have like a new area that species encounter, it takes a lot of time and effort to sort of sow the soil and mature the area such that you get the complexity that we see in the Amazon, or where I come from, at the redwoods in California. These really ancient forests that are teeming with life. We call it biodiversity, but that's really, I would say, just it's not about the number of species alone. It's about the intricacies of the relations. So,
intelligence.
I research a lot in my work how culture occurs. We talk about animal cultures, like non-human animal cultures, but there's also cultures in ecosystems, in trees, plants, bacteria, fungi, how they adapt and they keep out pathogens, right? So that they keep out these opportunistic ranchier-seeking organisms that just want to take and steal. They are, you could say, anti-capitalistic by design, in the sense that they don't let a specific organism come in and dominate to the detriment of all. And what happens, of course, when an organism does succeed in doing that? It eats everything, and then there's nothing left to eat, and its population levels plummet to near zero.
Yeah, and then there's a space, and then there will be nothing for a while, and something new will come. But even if we're talking about the Earth will be fine, we're talking, of course, about tens of thousands of years at the minimum, and millions of years more
exactly.
Properly.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of speciation, we're talking about many millions of years. For the type of complexity that we enjoy around, and it's, I don't think it's just about that. Like, I think that we are, as a species, part of everything, and that we're not just a cancer on the earth. We're neither, just like any other species, we're neither, angels or demons. Mm-hmm. We have the potential to be either, but most of the time we're just somewhere in the middle. We're just human, And so this is part of like a larger strategy I have of trying to create and organize societal design to not require us to be heroes or more than human in order to make things go well. Mm-hmm. We need to understand how human psychology and sociology work, evolutionary anthropology, and design our systems ecologically to guide us in ways that allow things to be easy for us where we're at, not to only have them be easy if we sort of adopt some sort of heroic posture of being, the diamond in the rough who's able to, some Rocky American action film, like against all odds, beat the slum culture and this and that and the pollution in order to, become, a decent member of society. No, we need to make meaning and purpose at the center of every human being's opportunity. And we need to cultivate that and nurture that every step of the way. Look what happens when you don't do that. Look at the US. You have shootings left and right. And these are, shootings of despair, deaths of despair, we know worldwide, especially post-corona and in the global north. Suicide and depression are quickly becoming, major causes of death.
Yeah, one of my favorite news bits from the United States is that Trump was arrested in every single way. So he announced that he was going to get arrested. Then there was a crowd around the building. I think it was Tuesday or something, but they were all journalists. So all the journalists were ready for the event. Then artificial intelligence, someone created the actual news photos and everything. So we could just say it happened, right? The only thing, it didn't actually happen, but all the other parts of it were already present.
So what does that mean for you?
Well, that's what is important. The important thing is not whether. So I make a distinction between reality and actuality. So reality is what you experience. If you see this photo of Trump getting arrested in a heroic fashion, you have this feeling like he's the hero and, injustice is being done to him. This feeling that I don't get it, but I guess a Trump supporter could get it. This feeling is real because you really experience it, but he didn't actually get arrested. So I think one of the things that Socrates did and but also what you are doing in your context is asking, but what is actually happening? So as an example, from your article, so many people say it's not possible, it's not realistic to change our ways in face of the climate crisis. But you're saying, but look at Corona. We did it already.
Yeah.
It's possible. So you can say it's not possible because it is possible. And actually, we even have more costs to do it at this moment.
Yeah.
And then you can talk about what are the reasons that it doesn't happen. But actually, all the bullshit and all the images, everything aside, we can just do it. We could decide it tomorrow.
It's costing us more not to take action on climate change than it would to take massive action right now.
Yeah.
Like per year. I mean, the US alone last year had 1.47% of its population displaced, over $1 trillion in a single country in climate catastrophe-related damages. I mean, that's unreal. What we pay annually for wars, which are, I would say, totally avoidable, but that's a whole different subject. If we took just a small portion of that, would easily take care of all global Paris commitments. If we took a larger portion of that, because about 10% of all global GDP goes to war annually. Yeah. And if we took 5% of global GDP, so 5% away from war, that would cover all SDGs, all the Sustainable Development Goals. And to me, this cracks me up, right? Like I get I get chuffed that we have made the decision somewhere along the line as a global society that it makes more sense to invest in war than it does to take care of the biosphere, which supports all life. Yeah. Even as every year, our food is getting more expensive because climate disruption is making our seasons erratic and is wiping out harvests worldwide. We think we have problems now. Just wait in 5 years. Mm-hmm. You think that this is, that we can wait a second on climate change. Every second that ticks by, we are sort of doubling down on the horrors that all of us will experience, and the rich too. I mean, Douglas Rushkoff has a great book called The Survival of the Richest. And he talks about how the ultra-rich, the elites, have this half-baked idea, this half-baked logic that they somehow will go to Mars, go to their island, their bat cave in New Zealand, and they will divorce themselves from humanity. And while everybody else burns and suffers, they will be drinking martinis on the beachfront.
Yeah, but that's Dr. Strangelove. That movie has been made already.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I want to get back to this, but just to pass, because, this is, you see what's going on, but you see, so we are all clear what the problem is. We all know, we have all the science we need. We have all the resources we need. We have all the policies we need. We have all the technology. We don't need to invent the technology to block the sun, to get us out of this, but we have everything we need. But at the same time, so I don't know if you have this experience as well, then you're talking to somebody educated, someone who has maybe power to change things, and you're having conversations about switching to a vegetarian diet as a standard, or what about China? Or so how do you, because those things I cannot really. I spoke to Lee McIntyre last. Do you know him? Mm-hmm. He wrote this book, How to Talk to a Science Denier, and he puts a lot of emphasis on making a connection and also kind of controlling your emotions. And we also spoke about martial arts because we're both, amateurs, but that's important to kind of not be, placed off center by your emotions and everything like that. So it's kind of a training as well. Mm-hmm. But it's still this absurd situation where you're saying, we have to change everything basically on a planetary level. But I'm speaking to you about whether we should have a vegetarian lunch or whether we should this very small thing. So how do you experience situations like that? And
every day.
Yeah.
Every
so
day.
How does that feel with you, and how do you stay sane, I guess?
Well, I would say the short answer is I don't. I don't think any of us are insane. Are insane right now.
Latour said, we have all these different crazy people now. Types of insanity.
I think that Krishnamurti said it's no act of sanity to be well adjusted to an insane society.
Yeah,
our society is insane at this point, and it's producing insanity and suffering. For me, they're the same thing. Two facets of the same visage. But we are creating unnecessary suffering and insanity by virtue of instability, insecurity. And how do we create more instability and insecurity? We undermine the fecundity, the richness that the natural world provides. We undermine the stability of ecosystems. The war in Syria, in some significant ways, was spawned by a drought.
Yeah, for sure.
And so if Europe cares about immigrants, if you're right-wing, xenophobe in Europe, you should really care about climate change. You should be the vegetarian, bicycle riding, heat pump installing citizen urging to get rid of cars in your city because you don't want immigration. Now, of course, I don't agree with that. I think, having the chickens come home to roost is just part of history. But I am very much in favor of a contract and converge carbon budget, right? Where the global north contracts its CO2 use and converges with the sustainable level with the global south, so that there's not this huge difference, say, between the Netherlands, where your average Dutch citizen is consuming and spewing out 40 to 80 times as much CO2 as your average Bangladeshi. Mm-hmm. And of course, what I always hear in response is, yeah, but you want to live like your average Bangladeshi? It's like, well, I don't think we need to be consuming as much as we do. I don't think we need to be polluting as much as we do. I think that we could learn a lot from how Bangladeshi society is resilient in the face of crises, and how they help each other out when they have these, very regular climate catastrophes that happen, because they're also lowlands, but don't have the world's best hydrologists like we do. Yeah. But as Rutger Bregman said in his book Het Water komt, it is a matter of inevitability. We are having this conversation at a university that's 8 meters below sea level. Mm-hmm. While I hope and pray that the world will regain its sanity and drink from a different well and have some different assumptions about what we can do with the world. On our current trajectory, this university will be underwater.
Yeah, but one of the things, it doesn't give me exactly hope, but the thing is that we're now at 1.2 or something, and before we get to 1.5, we will experience a 1.3 and 1.4 world, and the
You mean in meters of sea level rise?
Well, sea level rise is more long term, right? But more in weather extremes.
I don't know whether that's true, to be honest, because if you look at some data, we see a non-linear sort of dose response. Yeah. And if you look at a lot of the measurements, they are happening much faster than anyone predicted, which is
there was actually a study today, yesterday, I think, about that in the North Sea is rising faster than we think.
So I think this is fascinating, because what it tells us is we have been trying to delay, which is a form of denial, as Michael Mann says, soft denial, he calls it. We have been trying to delay and do the absolute minimum to change any of the major ways in which we're destroying our environment, like fossil fuels, unsustainable farming, etc., in order to keep business as usual going, right? So we have been trying to do the very minimum, but there's no buffer room. And what we're finding is the threshold that we thought was the crucial threshold is actually coming way sooner than we anticipated. Yeah. And we're going to continue in the next year, 5 years, 10 years, if we go that long.
Yeah. Because we don't really have a good basic understanding of we know that the Earth systems are very complex, but we also know that we're just starting to understand it. So we don't really, we understand a lot already, but But
this is all also about phase change, right? Going back to your initial allegory of the cave, we're still in the cave. And so the logic and the science, in fact, that we're doing is cave logic and cave science. But in fact, the cave is caving in.
Yeah. Well, how in the cave, in the first stage, he gets released and then turned around, and then he has pointed out all the objects in front of the fire, but he still he only wants to go back to his seat. And if he succeeds, I think it says it literally like that. If he succeeds, he just goes back to his seat, and then it's all a bad dream.
Yeah,
but exactly. Maybe that's like the stage we're at, right? Like
we're at the bad dream stage.
But people are pointing but okay, look what's going on. But these are not even the objects themselves. These are the statues right in front of. We're not even walking to the surface or something.
Yeah, it's still so. The question is, what happens when the projection stops, right? Or like the internet stops and your image glitches and stands still. Yeah. What happens? People don't know what to do. Eventually they'll get up, right? But, there's this moment where you expect you're so geared in to this process. There's so much inertia. You're like, wait a minute, like, what's going on? I will just keep on watching, because it's the movement, right? It's the, like I said, the illusion and the movement, the novelty, as I read about at the beginning, that keeps us entranced, right? And so I like to think about this in theological terms, because I believe that it's the most faithful way to understand what's actually going on psychologically. Why haven't we made the change that we needed? We knew 30 years ago. We've produced more CO2 since the first IPCC report in 1990 than in the entire history of humanity prior. Right?
So, just because what you're, we're in the diagnosis of the diagnosis is clear, I think. It's not, doesn't make us happy, but it's pretty clear.
I don't think it's clear to everybody, though, because I think some people are still watching the screen and saying, this is the only game in town. Why are you trying to disrupt my movie?
Yeah. So that's why, because I'm trying to get somewhere myself. I hope you can help me. So one part is the question I ask. Okay, so you are speaking with someone like that, but I don't want to. We have to be careful to phrase it like that, because it doesn't mean like someone is stupid or something like that. No, actually, many times they're very smart, highly educated, caring people, and they care about something. And one of the things I think to explain it is that whatever we say threatens something. If you have children, for instance, if someone starts to say, "Hey, but what about when your child is 50 years old?" I mean, you don't want to think about that, right? So I understand people don't want to be thinking about it. But this one, having these kind of conversations and being in between let's say the actuality and the reality. But the other part is, but how do we get out? Because we can move around in this situation and we can explore it and we can understand it. But I think we pretty much understand it. And not but I'm saying you and me and the experts who've looked at it and then analyzed it and analyzed
scientists and
the psychologists and you can look at the role of Exxon who knew all this. You can look at how politics works and populism, distraction. But okay. How do we get out of this? What's the way out?
Yeah, nobody has figured that one out yet.
No.
There's a lot of people trying, and a lot of people I know personally who have dedicated their lives to it, including myself. And a lot of these people are my friends who I deeply trust, who are world-class scientists, activists, thinkers, change makers, innovators, entrepreneurs, you name it.
Yeah.
Poets, right? Because we need the artists, contrary to Plato, right? I think that, finding new narratives, finding new ways to meet our needs is the basic sort of game A strategy. Right? Mm-hmm. That's how we make the system move within the existing system. Game B is realizing that our system, no matter how we manage it, is completely corrupt in every sense of the term and unsustainable in every sense of the term, and moving to whatever comes next. Some people call it ecological civilization, right? So ecological civilization is not game A, it's game B. But most people at this point, out of pragmatism and pure strategy, and I'm doing this myself, we're focusing on how to take this vicious circle, this race to the bottom, and change the incentives to make it a race to the top, right? Mm-hmm. Now, that's no easy thing, but it's easier than converting what we have now to planetary civilization or ecological civilization.
Yeah, because the solution needs to come at the planetary level, pretty much, right?
Absolutely.
Whatever solution there is.
Absolutely. Yeah. But what I'm talking about with planetary civilization or ecological civilization is a change state as different from gas to liquid to solid. I'm talking about a change that drastic.
Yeah, but then you're talking also about consciousness.
But consciousness is not divorced from materiality. And this is something that, the two go together. And when people talk about, we just need to change the structures. Yeah, well, if people aren't behind these new things, nobody will use them, or people ridicule them, or they'll try to destroy them, right? So if you don't have the consciousness caught up with your material technological change or de-technological change. On the other hand, it doesn't matter, how advanced your consciousness is, which it obviously isn't from reading any of our news media or social media. But if your consciousness is changing, your material structures will have to change, or the consciousness won't be able to change beyond a very limited extent. So basically what I'm saying is we all are very disabled at this point in history. We're only using, even our best scientists, there are no geniuses beyond a certain level, because we cannot get there with where our planet is at in terms of the effects that are happening. In a different state, right? This is going back to the metaphor of the change state between liquid, solid, gas, plasma, etc. When we change states, everything changes. And sometimes this is a very rapid thing. We are not at that tipping point yet.
No.
We're far from it. We're still very much in entrenchment resistance. It's the last fling of a dying system that's basically throwing out all of its firepower.
Yeah, fighting for its survival.
Yeah, but what is it? There's no thing that's surviving. That's the funniest thing. So here's where we get actually to the nub of the issue. This is identification and attachment, right? Mm-hmm. So we have identities of ourselves as a web of relations with culture, people, institutions, ideologies. And the more attached we are to these things, the more everything suffers. Every religion teaches this. Mm-hmm. Like freedom, the way out is letting go of our attachments to these things. Yeah. Now, what happens when you have a certain set of people, let's call them scientists, actively trying to disattach from some of their attachments, identity attachments, another group that's trying to double down because they're scared. Right? Yeah. If you look at the research, like the real snowflakes are not people who are climate activists or scientists. They're actually people who are very afraid of change. And so they're so afraid that they arm themselves to the teeth, which is a fear mechanism, right? It's a defensive mechanism to try to cope with the situation where you think that you are existentially threatened, when really what's all that's being threatened is maybe your ideology, your belief, or exchanging a certain material item.
Yeah, and maybe, that's right. And the thing is, you can also see that probably the things that they're attached to, they would probably be happy if they didn't have them.
Exactly. Well, this is
because they're also a cage, right?
Yeah.
They're also an illusion that, well, like an addiction, right? There's something that they think they absolutely need that. I mean, I was a smoker for smoking tobacco for many years. It took me about 4 or 5 years to quit. I guess that's why I never started experiment with any other drugs, because I'm probably prone to addiction. But the thing was, it felt like if I would actually quit, everything would end. Because, for instance, what would I do during a break or something, or during a phone call or something like that? And I couldn't imagine it. Mm-hmm. So you
couldn't imagine life without identifying as a smoker.
The thing that comes up is exactly that, and that's actually the thing that got me to quit is this. I don't remember the title. If it was a small book, and it said you don't have to stop smoking, you have to stop being a smoker. I think, okay, good. So then it said stop being a smoker first. You can smoke for a little bit longer, but after a while you quit. And then the other part was someone who said, okay, what you should do is in the morning, so when you just wake up, it's the longest time you haven't smoked because you were sleeping, and open the window and take some deep breaths. And then fine, smoke a cigarette. But the thing is, your body will get to know the difference, because that's also, we don't feel anymore, right? We don't feel the difference between what it is like to be well, to be healthy, and to be sick. So we think that being well is not having to think about being busy with how sick you are or something like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. This is the shifting baselines problem, right? Both with our ecology, where we think like this is how things should be, right? Yeah. And Catherine McKenna, she calls this the 10% planet. We're living with 10% of fecundity of nature that we once had just a few hundred years ago, where, we had wild horses running around. Their bellies were purple from the berries that were everywhere.
Yeah.
Right? There was just so much abundance everywhere, right? And in philosophy, we also call this the adaptive preferences, where we might not want something, but once we sort of get it hooked on it, we can't imagine our life without it. And so we identify with that so much as part of ourselves, that without it, we feel like we would be empty, our lives would be meaningless, that we fear for our lives if we don't have the cigarette, the car, the fossil fuels, whatever it is. Same. It doesn't matter. A good friend of mine, David Presti at UC Berkeley, a professor of neuroscience, wrote an article called, This is Your Brain on Fossil Fuels. Back in the 1980s, when I was a kid, had these commercials in the US about this is your brain on drugs. And like an egg frying on a pan.
Oh, that's great.
And, he talks about basically everything we experience, the whole haste and speeding up of society, which also, creates chronic fatigue, what do they call it? Mental breakdowns and burnout, depression. It is a result of fossil fuels, quite directly. Without fossil fuels, we wouldn't have been able to be so inundated with having to do so many things that we would get to that state. And that at this point, we identify so much with the state as human nature rather than as human conditioned, that we feel that if we took this away, it would take a chunk of our heart out. So it would be like taking an organ out of our body.
People are literally saying, when I write opinion pieces sometimes to try to also tease out some of these things, and they're saying, well, but if you would do that, if you would do, for instance, what Extinction Rebellion is demanding, society would collapse. The economy would collapse, and then we don't have anything. So
there's this. So that's an all or nothing.
Yeah,
sort of like this way or the highway.
So better to slow down gradually. Well, I tried this with smoking. Like, I'll only smoke at in weekends, or it's all the.
Did that work?
No.
Okay. Yeah. So,
but it's all the addiction.
The argument of all or nothing. Anytime somebody gives you a ultimatum like that, it's coming from a place of powerlessness.
Yeah.
It's coming from a place of fear. Right.
Like in a relationship, like if you leave me, you're not going to be happy for anyone. Yeah.
Yeah. Like either you do this or I'm going to leave.
Yeah.
Right. When you give such propositions to people, first of all, most of the time they're going to leave. And second of all, what it does is you're forcing a decision by trying to take out all the stops. Right. It's an act of violence in a way. But it's also not realizing that that's not how the situation is naturally flowing or developing, right? If you know the positive psychology of Csikszentmihalyi,
I don't know it.
Flow state, right?
Oh, yeah.
Flow state is where ease and challenge are equally met, right? And, when people feel challenged, but they don't feel the ease, there's a tendency to shrivel up and, either go back to your cave, or to break out the guns and try to, kill the person who's trying to, break you away from the thing you're identifying with as part of you, right? Existential risk, right? There's the idea that this is a threat to my life. If I'm a coffee addict in the most extreme, and you say, okay, no more coffee, it's stopping because, hey, we can't get coffee from Africa or Latin America anymore because the currents on the oceans have changed so substantially that shipping has to stop. Sorry, which is a very probable thing in the future. If I'm a coffee addict, I will feel that part of my self, however I conceive that, is being threatened. And I will try to do whatever I can to deal with that, because my neuroreceptors, as well as other receptors all in my body that have become accustomed to this stimuli, they are in withdrawal. And so let's talk about the symptoms of withdrawal just for a second. And that's where we're at right now. We're in a society that has, really mainlined fossil fuels for 100 years. Before that was whale blubber, right? And coal. But we really have mainlined fossil fuels for 100 years, and now we're being told to stop. And we're trying to stop little by little, but we're actually every year consuming more fossil fuels than the previous year. It's this.
And the little by little would have been viable if we started
30 years
ago.
Yeah.
Now I'm sure you've heard about the farmer protests and everything in the Netherlands. So I also understand that for people, for a lot of people, it can feel like all of a sudden this is a big problem. I mean, first of all, how big a problem is it if I didn't hear about it before? And now suddenly we have to change, and can't we do it slowly? And
there's incredulity,
but
there's also a feeling of betrayal, right?
A justified feeling of betrayal.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So if that's precisely what I'm saying. If our government has been complicit in climate change denial and completely, alternative facts and not being honest with the situation that we're in, as a half of our country is below the sea level, and not being honest with those facts because, it was inconvenient for one reason or another, and suppressed those facts, and not only suppressed the facts, but didn't act on it in any appropriate way. And now says all of a sudden, okay, we need to make changes, and then completely gaffes the way to do it. Instead of asking people, okay, what do you think that needs to be done? This is where we need to get to. How do we propose that needs to do that? You have bottom-up ideas, people working together. Yeah. You have empowerment of farmers. That's not how this was done.
No, and you have to start, but this is still not done. So normally, if you have different scenarios, we had that in Corona. They said, okay, we think we should do all the social distancing and working from home and all that stuff, because if we don't do it, this is what will happen. Like the healthcare system might collapse. But that's not so. I'm just thinking how you phrased it before. The climate is presented as an either-or game. So we have now to do everything, otherwise everything will fail. But that's not true. So you have these different pathways. We have the path. We can still maybe, I don't know, but we still maybe have a small chance to get to 1.5 degrees. But okay, if we say okay, we don't want to do that, we don't. Okay, then the next step is what about 2 degrees?
Or what about 1.6 degrees? I mean, I think one of the problems of sort of climate policy has been to have these huge discrete things instead of saying, no, we need to stop things as soon as possible right now. Yeah. Not 2030, not 2050, right now at 1.2 as much as we can. Mm-hmm. And then it's like if we're pulling on a rope.
He's standing up now and pretending he's pulling on a rope.
If you're in a tug of war, every centimeter you give, you grit your teeth and you don't give in.
Yeah.
You keep on fighting.
You fight for your life. Yeah, exactly.
And we're all fighting for our lives. We're fighting for the lives of our children and our children's children.
Yeah.
And that's what we're fighting for. And we're not fighting against anybody. We're fighting against human ignorance. Which is in everybody. And that's like one of the things I study, right? It's like none of us are free from this. And like that's why I refuse to take sort of an elitist position, because we've all been complicit and duped into this in various ways. We all, I have friends of mine who have to remind me, I buy a new cell phone. They're like, actually, I buy all my cell phones used, because there's a lot of people who just get a cell phone, return it after 6 days or something, or a week. And then, they can't sell it again as new. So it's used and they would throw it away otherwise. And so I need my community of friends to keep me honest about the ways that I've been caught up in this culture where I think that I need this thing in order to survive or get ahead. This is Nietzsche. Nietzsche's idea of being clever, which he said is the worst thing ever, right? So there's, like you said, there's lots of smart people. Yeah. And a lot of us smart people are trying to outsmart each other. Mm-hmm. And that is a zero-sum game based on competition. It's Moloch, right? It's not going to get us out of this situation. We cannot rely on zero-sum games any longer, or survival of the richest games, where we say, okay, well, you ignorant people over there are going to suffer, but I'm going to go off on my boat or whatever the excuse is. The idea that, Bruno Latour, who you mentioned in his book Down to Earth, he says, the idea that we could opt out of our humanity and of our solidarity with our species, that's the original sin. Yeah. That's the point where you see,
we start to separate
everything after that is not going to work, because it's based on a false premise. It's based on a false idea that we could separate ourselves and get away with it somehow, right? And it's like no religion would endorse this. No religion would say that this is a good thing. No ethical system would say, yeah, leave those people behind. You're a great person. Like who thinks that like such ideas make any sense when you put them in those terms? Yeah. And yet we all, to one degree or another, almost all of us, make certain calculations, take certain actions, have certain polarizations, which emphasize this sort of thinking. Mm-hmm. And that, I believe, the lie of separation is the root cause of how we have come to this environmental and social disaster, this polycrisis, this crisis in meaning, which is like a black hole sucking in everything that we try to throw at it, everything we, try to fight it. Because as long as we have this idea of an other that we're fighting, instead of fighting, you could say for life, when we're fighting against, when we're trying to hurt because we're hurt, because we're traumatized. Bessel van der Kolk, the psychologist, the famous Dutch psychologist, he talks about the body keeps the score, right? And he talks about how, just like Gabor Mate, we are all to one or another degree traumatized. And it's not a game of who's more or less traumatized, but it's the intelligence of the heart to connect our own feelings of frustration, of resentment, of scarcity, of sadness, of injustice to that of everybody else, and realize that we're all in this together, no matter what, whether we like it or not. And that seems to be the limit of how we move forward, of how we deal with the fossil fuel industry, with how we deal with the capture of every single government on the face of the earth by transnational corporations.